From your calendar, 2021 34th Legislative Town Hall starts in 15 minutes. From your calendar, 2021 34th Legislative Town Hall starts in 15 minutes.
Where is the freaking device? Hey, Jordan.
Hey, Rachel. Tonight's event will be a town hall format. Many of the questions were pre-submitted by residents of our district. Few came from our organization's policy caucuses, and others were developed by our planning committee. Questions may be directed toward a specific panelist, while others are asked more generally. But panelists are welcome to jump in and respond to any questions or add further comment to any response. Once all of the prepared questions have been asked and answered, we will work through some questions from our live audience. So if you have a question you would like to submit, please go ahead and send it to me in the chat. Again, name is Jordan Crawley, and I will add it to our queue. If we have high levels of participation, we probably won't get to every question, but we will try our best. And lastly, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us for this special event. Thank you for your engagement and your presence despite all of the challenges of this pandemic, caring about what our legislators are actually doing in Olympia and in Washington, D.C. To our panelists, starting with Congresswoman Jayapal, then Senator Wynn, and finally Representatives Cody and Fitzgibbon. We would like it if you all could take about 2 minutes each for an opening statement and get us warmed up for the rest of our discussion.
Should I start?
You may.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Happy sunny Sunday in Seattle. I just came from the West Seattle Nursery. I've got my starts. I'm ready to go. But I just want to say how grateful I am to be able to represent you and thank our state legislators also that represent the 34th for their amazing work in this last session. 2 minutes, so I'm going to go very quickly. This has been a tough quarter. I think everybody knows. I'm very glad to be alive. And I want to thank you all for all of your support during the insurrection and during the following time of getting COVID. And just to say how important it is that we have elected together a new House, capped our House majority, a new Senate majority, and finally a new president that we can wake up to every morning and not worry about all the horrible things he's going to say or do. In fact, it's been the opposite. I was at Joe Biden's speech. I was invited to be at Joe Biden's speech on Wednesday, and it was phenomenal. It was a really strong, progressive speech full of priorities that really reframe and reshape the conversation in America. Trickle-down economics doesn't work. I've always said that's true. We've always known that's true. Now the President of the United States has said it. We're investing in priorities from infrastructure to childcare to long-term care to free community college, one of my first bills that I introduced when I was in the state Senate back in 2016. This is really important because if we are going to build back better, we need to reframe the conversation around government's role and the role of investment in our communities. So I did want to quickly tell you that, of course, this all started with the most bold, progressive jobs relief package that we could have ever imagined, $1.9 trillion. Imagine that is 10% of our GDP in one relief package. And because of that, we were able to get money in people's pockets, and the Progressive Caucus, and I'm so proud to be the chair of the Progressive Caucus in the House, that's 94 members strong now. But we were able to get those survival checks out to people. We were able to get a child tax credit passed, and we need to make it permanent now, that will cut child poverty in half. We were able to expand unemployment benefits. We were able to get relief to small businesses, get relief to our cities, our states, our localities, and make sure at the end of the day that we are crushing the virus. And so now in Seattle, we are at 67% in terms of people who have gotten at least a first shot of the vaccine. And I really hope that everybody will take advantage of the fact that we have lots of vaccines now because the American Rescue Plan put $20 billion into vaccine production and distribution. Couple of quick things in terms of the House. We have passed the PRO Act. We have passed a $15 minimum wage. We have passed H.R. 1. We passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We passed the DREAM Act, the Farm Worker Modernization Act, My Access to Counsel Act, which was the first bill I ever introduced, the No Ban Act. And we have introduced a number of important priorities for the 34th, and that is the My Medicare for All bill, of course, has been introduced with 115 original co-sponsors, not that we got after lots of work along the way, but original co-sponsors, 15 committee chairs also. And we also have introduced, I introduced a wealth tax with Elizabeth Warren. Your first $50 million is free and clear, but every dollar after that, you pay 2%, 2 cents on every dollar, and every dollar after $1 billion, you pay 3 cents, and that would generate trillions of dollars for us to make these investments. I think the last thing I want to say, because I'm conscious of the 2-minute time limit, is that we are coming out of a really dark time, and our democracy is still very much at stake. We have passed all these bills in the House, but they will languish in the Senate if we don't eliminate or reform the filibuster. And so this week, the Progressive Caucus is having a week of action on the filibuster to educate our constituents about what it is and to really make the case for why it is a legacy of Southern slavery days and a Jim Crow relic, and why we need to actually reform or eliminate it if we're going to get these things done. Otherwise, we're twisting ourselves into parliamentarian pretzels, trying to make these things comply with budget reconciliation rules. Otherwise, we will have to go back as Democrats next year and tell people we couldn't get things like gun reform done. I should have mentioned we passed 2 gun reform bills as well in the House. We couldn't get done immigration. We couldn't get done voting rights, which is one of the most important pieces right now, along with DC statehood, which we also passed. So I'm looking forward to your questions. I live in West Seattle, out of the entire 7th Congressional District. This is where I live. So really happy to represent, and thank you all so much for putting this together. Thank you to the board as well, Carla, Rachel, all of you, Jordan, for all of the work that you put into making this legislative district strong and thriving.
Senator Wynn, it would be Senator Wynn's turn now for your opening.
That's right. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. To everybody at the 34th, such an honor to be here today as well. I did see a lot of your advocacy and efforts as it relates to emails and phone calls throughout these sessions. So it's always great to see how engaged the community here. I even saw Rachel on the side of the street driving back from Olympia one day, waving signs. Was that you on the side of the street? Yeah, with the signs. That was very impressive. But this was one of the most consequential legislative sessions in recent memory. and potentially ever, if I'm honest. And largely it's because you may hear my kids in the background. I'm doing double duty as a dad. And it's largely because that's what happens when, instead of having to fight to make sure that your voice is being heard, it's being uplifted and amplified. And it is not an accident that we had one of the most progressive sessions and also the most diverse legislature in the history of Washington State. We increased funding for TANF by 15%. And as a reference, during the last recession, we decreased it by 15%. So being able to increase it during this pandemic has been an honor, because we know that's going to help families. We funded the Working Families Tax Credit. It's been 12 years since that was passed, and we funded it this year. And we also included I-10 filers as well. We had over $300 million in relief for undocumented workers. We had over $1 billion in relief for renters as well. We were able to pass capital gains in order for us to fund childcare and then tax relief for those who need it the most. We had some of the most progressive police accountability measures in the entire nation. And then I'm sure we're going to hear from Brett Fitzgibbon afterwards, but this was a great year to address climate change as well. So it is an absolute honor to be part of the effort. We have a long way to go in order to make sure that we have an equitable recovery, but it is such a privilege to serve. And thank you so much to everybody in 34th for all that you've done to help make sure that these policies got passed as well.
All right, Representative Cody, would you like to next?
Yep, I will take it from there. And again, thanks for having us and for putting this on. And as Joe said, it was my two Joes. I get bracketed by the two Joes. It was definitely a big year for the Democrats in Washington, and we were able to see a lot of things that we've been working on for years get through. So that felt good, definitely. But we really went into the session focusing on COVID and our response to COVID, also on equity issues. We're trying to make sure that we moved equity forward and climate. And I won't talk about that because Fitzy's the one that knows everything about climate. But we were able, specifically in healthcare, we did a lot of bills that from things that we learned during COVID, and we were able to move things through that will make care different. I mean, I think you're all probably aware of telemedicine and how much work that we've done now with telemedicine. So we updated some of our telemedicine laws. We add scope of practice issues that were some change, like for respiratory therapists doing ECMO, which is the treatment for when they're in ICU. So there were just a lot of different little things that we did on that. And also from long-term care, because of how hard it was on our seniors, we've made sure that all of the facilities would now have emergency plans, so visitation and working on that. So there was I'd say lots of little things that all add up to being better prepared for if this happens to us in the future, but also to be able to move forward. So, but the problem, probably the biggest policy bill was a follow-up to the Cascade Care, our public option, since I'm sure you're all aware that we did not get the hospitals to participate like we had hoped. They basically were opposed to the bill from the beginning. And because of COVID, they were able to use that as an excuse for why they wouldn't contract. So Senator Frocht and I worked together and got a bill through that will assure that by 2023, we will have a public option available in every county. So that's probably the biggest policy bill that was not just directly related to COVID or any of our equity issues. So I won't go on because I know that climate was probably one of the biggest things we did, and I want to give Joe plenty of time to talk about that.
Thanks, Eileen, and thanks everybody for making the time to be here this afternoon and get caught up on what we've been up to. And it's great to hear from Representative Jayapal about all the amazing things that she is pushing so hard on back in DC. On climate, this was really a 2 years ago, we had what I called at the time a breakthrough session on climate, because we passed 100% clean electricity and an array of other really big bills to move forward on climate. But I said we couldn't just stop there. We were going to have every session going forward be as productive on climate as the 2019 session was, if we were going to be able to claim that we are taking this challenge seriously as a state. The good news is it looks like 2021, we surpassed our effort in 2019 with some really outstanding legislation. One I've been working on for many years, which we finally are getting to the governor's desk, a clean fuel standard to reduce pollution from transportation fuels in our state, by far the most polluting sector. This has been a real labor. The bill that we ended up getting agreement on with the Senate was not quite as strong as the bill that we have been pushing from the House, but still an amazing step forward, finally completing the West Coast wall of jurisdictions, British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, and California, all of which have this impactful policy in place to decarbonize the transportation sector. The other enormous win was Washington became the second state in the country after California to adopt a firm cap on Washington's greenhouse gas emissions, and to say that our greenhouse gas goals are no longer just goals, they are enforceable capped standards. And as the other function of that cap is it's going to generate hundreds of millions of dollars for investments in things that to continue our state's progress towards a sustainable future, things like transit, like clean electricity, upgrading our electrical grid, investing in natural climate solutions like floodplains and aquatic lands and farmland, carbon sequestration, wildfire prevention, local government planning. So many things are going to be well resourced as a result of that enormous win, which I will tell you, until right a few days before the end of session, I still didn't really think it was going to be possible for us to get that done. It really was a labor by so many people, tribal nations at the forefront in advocating for that bill to make it into law. Tremendous victory for our state and for future generations. A few other big wins on climate, which kind of get over, and the environment generally, which get a little bit overshadowed by some of the climate wins, but shouldn't, because they're important in their own right. Nation leading effort on single-use plastics, requiring more recycled content in plastic materials, making plastic food serviceware ask on request only. So when you go to the restaurant, unless you ask for plastic food serviceware, the default will be to not give you that, as well as the HEAL Act, which is a legislation to embed environmental justice principles in all state agency decision-making. That was an enormous breakthrough as well for environmental justice, to ensure that we're not just talking aspirationally about environmental justice, but actually requiring state agencies like the Departments of Ecology and Agriculture and Natural Resources and Commerce to really embed the questions around, is this going to exacerbate or reduce environmental health disparities whenever they make a significant agency decision. So really big steps forward for environmental justice, climate, reducing plastic waste, and we have a lot of great work to build on in the sessions to come on these fronts.
Great, thank you, everybody. We'd like to head into the question portion of the program right now. And the first question I will address to Congresswoman Jayapal. We would like to know from you what you consider your biggest legislative victories, and the panel can weigh in on this as well. But what do you consider your biggest legislative victories and disappointments this year? And what are your thoughts or plans for the rest of this year and for next session?
Yes, thank you. Well, the biggest legislative victory, no question about it, was the passage of the American Rescue Plan. Really being able to get that $1.9 trillion out, with every single piece of that bill being so important, and things we haven't even touched on, just thinking about the money we put towards Black farmers in this country to really right the historic wrongs that have been committed against Black farmers, the environmental justice provisions that were in the American Rescue Plan. There's just so much that is in that. And our focus has really been on trying to make sure people get access to all of those benefits. And then of course, the money that went to states to help on transit and light rail and other things like that. So that was the biggest legislative victory. The biggest defeat was not including $15 minimum wage in that package. I mean, we pushed very hard. It was because of the Progressive Caucus that it got included in the House bill. And I was working almost every day, sometimes a couple of days, in conversation with Bernie Sanders in the Senate. And we just couldn't get it through because the parliamentarian ruled that it did not fit with the Byrd rules. And this goes to the filibuster, needing 60 votes for everything, almost everything that doesn't have a financial impact. We think that the budget office, the CBO, scored it incorrectly, and we think the parliamentarian made a bad decision. I pushed for the parliamentarian to be overruled, which has happened before multiple times in our history, but we couldn't get there. So that was my biggest disappointment. We are not done with that. Probably twice a week, I'm having conversations with Mary Kay Henry at SEIU, with all the big labor leaders who have been pushing on 15, with the speaker, with Senate Majority Chuck Schumer, with Bernie Sanders and others. And we're trying to figure out how to get it done. And there are a few options, but really a lot of it is going to take the strength of willingness to reform or eliminate the filibuster, or to attach it to a must-pass defense bill, which is another piece that we're looking at, something like the NDAA. If we can attach it to defense authorization, perhaps we can get all 50 Democrats to vote for it, and some Republicans who will accept it as part of NDAA. In terms of what I'm looking at for upcoming, you have seen the president's jobs bill, and then he talked about the, which is a $1.8 trillion investment into jobs, clean energy, rebuilding our nation's infrastructure, but thinking about infrastructure in a very broad way. So it is about schools, it's about rural broadband, as well as our roads and bridges. And of course, it also includes $400 billion for long-term care, which is something that I helped negotiate with Mary Kay Henry into the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force agreements that we got last summer. So the president has now put that into the jobs plan. On Wednesday, he rolled out the families plan. We think those two things should go together. It's very difficult to bring any bill to the floor of the Senate. We need to just bring them together because we can't afford to waste time. And for women who have been pushed out of the workforce disproportionately, for families who desperately need childcare, we need to make sure that the paid leave components, the childcare components, and the community college are all part of being able to get a whole group of people back into the workforce and having access to the clean energy jobs. Now, we're also pushing for a bigger number on the climate investments piece, and just, congratulations, really. I think Joe did an amazing job of summing up what the state legislature has done. I'm so proud to represent this state and to be able to take our wins to the national level. But we did introduce the Thrive resolution, and the Thrive resolution is really 15 million people to work in family sustaining jobs, cutting climate pollution in half by 2030, and then advancing gender, environmental, indigenous, economic, and racial justice. We would have loved to see the president put more into climate in the infrastructure bill, because if we're going to do everything he's talking about, I think that is very important. But he did front load a lot of the investments into the grid, into a lot of the pieces, the clean energy standard, which is going to be critical to everything we want to do on climate. So we're pushing for that as well. And we're also pushing to include healthcare in this next package. The Families Plan, as it was released by the president, did include $200 million to make the ACA subsidies permanent. That was also something we had agreed on, to limit to 8.5% of income the expenses that people carry. And so that we want to make permanent. But more important, well, not more important, but equally important, we want to include drug pricing. I mean, this is one of the most important issues for people across the country, is cutting the price of prescription drugs. And that's not just Democrats, that's Democrats, independents, and Republicans. And we will save, if we allow Medicare and all payers to negotiate, just like the VA does, we could save somewhere around $650 billion. And with that 650, we want to take that, expand Medicaid in states that need it, make sure that we're covering our tribal communities with Medicaid expansion as well, but then also lower the Medicare eligibility age to 60 at least, and cover medical, hearing, dental, and vision in that. And that is a very important component. If we can go back to seniors and say we've done this, it would be a huge accomplishment. So that's a big priority for me as well. And I just led a letter of progressives and frontliners. So people in the most vulnerable districts in the country, Jared Golden in Maine, Cindy Axne in Iowa, Connor Lamb in Pennsylvania, and a whole bunch of others, to say that one of our most important priorities is this lowering of the Medicare eligibility age and the inclusion of these additional benefits, because it's very popular. It is the right thing to do for seniors. It is serving all of America to do that.
Thank you. Our next question is for our state legislators. We have a member who is concerned that we've not yet expanded the Seattle payroll tax statewide, and they would like to know if you would fight for that expansion in the future, and if in the meantime you are concerned that Seattle will lose business to its suburbs.
I can jump in real quick as well. We had a high earners payroll option as one of the components for progressive revenue in Washington State. And in fact, if you think about the overall trends of payroll as it relates to high income earners, they've gone down drastically over the last few decades. And the proposals that we have on hand wouldn't even bring it back to a fraction of what it was before. So if you look in the grand scheme of things, I don't know of many jurisdictions that have more favorable tax rates for the uber wealthy than we do in Washington State. So I think that that could be a potential option. And what's interesting is that we actually had business communities, business leaders come and ask about doing a statewide option versus just specifically in Seattle, because that way you'd have a bigger pool of people invested in these programs that would alleviate the burdens as a whole. So I think everybody understands that we need investments in things that help these businesses be successful, whether it's education, infrastructure, in the workforce. So if done correctly, I think it actually can be, I don't know, bipartisan per se, but definitely more cordial than we've seen in the past as well. So I have a bill that's out there. There's another version that's out there as well. So we'll see kind of what happens in the future. I know that that was one of the top priorities for us in terms of progressive revenue, but once the budget outlook changed a little bit and once cap gains became the moving vehicle, I think it was all hands on deck to get capital gains through. And that's where I ended up putting my focus as well.
I agree with Joe. I think we definitely, that was our focus this year, was to get capital gains through. But I want to take the opportunity to also thank Pramila for sending us lots of money, because God knows that's what helped us throughout the session. And you mentioned the tax credits through the exchange. That I'm praying that you get that to last, because that was wonderful. We're seeing growth in the individual market through the exchange. But the one thing I want you to work on is to let us be able to cover our undocumented and allow them to buy, because that's one of the things that we passed that we're going to ask for a waiver to try and the 50 million that we put into for state only money to do subsidies. That's we're wanting to cover everybody in Washington State under 200%, and so that's our goal. So I got to get my lobbying in when I get a chance.
No, that's great. And Jordan, can I just say something on that? We are so grateful to you for working on that at the state level. We push like hell at the federal level. You know, Eileen, this is like an issue that couldn't be nearer and dearer to my heart. We were able to at least get mixed status families in for the survival checks, but immigration has been, unfortunately, because of Trump, has become even worse. Now, in our Progressive Caucus priorities, we have prioritized the pathway to citizenship for essential workers as one of our 5 priorities for the next bill. But I fear that what we have done to making immigrants a political football, I'll be honest, by both Democratic and Republican administrations through the past, is unfortunately continuing. And so we're pushing very hard. And we're also pushing, by the way, to lift the bar for legal permanent residents, the 5-year bar for legal permanent residents to access safety net services. So we'll thank you for lobbying me on it. You've got me on it. I'm with you 8,000%, and so appreciate that the state is trying to do everything you can to address the exclusion of undocumented immigrants that is far too prevalent in our federal bills.
Rachel, do you have the next question?
I am so sorry. I didn't unmute myself. I need to put a nickel in the jar. So the next question is for Congresswoman Jayapal. And so you mentioned educating folks about the need to get rid of the filibuster. Could you just take a little time to explain how that process would work and specifically how impactful you believe eliminating the filibuster will be on the Senate's ability to pass through meaningful progressive legislation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to invite and Rachel Berkson, my deputy chief, if she's on the line, I think she is. Maybe you can put in the chat the national town hall we're doing on the filibuster this Thursday.
I
night.
sure will.
Okay, perfect. So the way the filibuster works is this was not always something that the founders envisioned. In fact, it was the opposite. The founders were very clear throughout history that they believed that the majority should rule, not the supermajority, but the majority. And they said that over and over again in different ways. And I have lots of quotes about our framers and how they talked about this. But over time, because primarily the Southern segregationists wanted to preserve their control over civil rights laws, they introduced this a set of provisions. The filibuster is the main one, but so is the cloture rule that came a little bit later, that basically said that you needed 60 votes to pass a bill in the Senate. Now I'm really shrinking all of the history down because there were a number of changes along the way. But the crux of this is that you need 60 votes to stop debate opposing the bill. Now, over time, it used to be that you had to go, when you hear President Biden talk about the talking filibuster, you actually had to be on the floor. Somebody had to be on the floor to oppose a bill the entire time. Now, you don't have to do that. You just have to say, I oppose it. And unless you can get to cloture, which is the other thing that has changed, and get 60 votes to end debate, you block every bill that's there. Now, there's also a 60 vote threshold for passing significant bills, except that the Republicans changed that for Supreme Court justices and for tax provisions. So when the Republicans passed their $2 trillion tax scam, they only needed 51 votes. And when they confirmed a number of Supreme Court justices, including Justice Kavanaugh, it only needed 51 votes. So it's not like, number one, that the filibuster has always been there in history. Not true. It's not like Republicans haven't changed it. Also not true. And now, if we want to pass a bill in the Senate, and I'll just take $15 as an example, you have to prove that it can meet the budget thresholds. Peter DeFazio, the chairman of the Infrastructure and Transportation Committee, who's a really good friend, he says the Senate goes off and has a seance with a dead guy to decide whether or not they can include something in a package. And that's called the Byrd Rule, that it has to comply with these budget provisions. It's so arcane. Who decides that? An unelected parliamentarian. She's not elected by anybody, but everyone goes and makes their case to her. And then she says, okay, I think it does or doesn't qualify with the Byrd Rule, and therefore you can or can't include it. That is the only way that you can pass something with 51 votes. Everything else has to have 60 votes. And so if you want to pass voting rights, and this goes back to this being a relic of the Jim Crow era, then you have to get 60 votes. If you want to pass George Floyd justice and policing, 60 votes. HR 1, getting money out of politics, and passing many of the reforms around democracy reform that we need to pass, 60 votes, because those don't have budgetary impacts that would qualify them for this arcane parliamentary procedure. So that is why we're framing everything. Most people don't care that much about the filibuster. And if anything, they remember Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and they're like, oh, that's a good thing, right? He was standing up against the establishment and he was doing this filibuster through the night. Not so much. But if you frame it if you first of all educate people about the fact that there's no history, the framers didn't intend this, this is not radical change. Number two, that Republicans have changed it for their benefit. And number three, that we're really going back to the idea that the majority should rule. Why would you give the tyranny of the minority the power in the Senate? Because essentially Mitch McConnell still controls the agenda in the Senate. So that's the very short history of the filibuster. And there's a great book by Adam Gentleson called Kill Switch that anyone who's interested should take a look at. We'll have a video from Adam that we'll play at the town hall, just a very short 3-minute video. And we, would welcome anyone. That's a public town hall. So please join us. Derek Johnson from the NAACP will be with us. Sarah Nelson from the flight attendants will be with us. And then a whole bunch of groups that are focused on passing these bills and educating people will also be with us. So it should be a really terrific event on Thursday. And we've got, I think, almost 24 members of Congress who are doing similar events in their districts to educate constituents. I, of course, will be co-hosting this national one. So we're not doing one specifically for the district, but we will down the road, I'm sure.
Thank you. Our next question is for the panel. How can we improve our messaging to get across the point that infrastructure investment means more than roads and bridges, and taking that step to convince more people, especially in our legislatures, that investment in infrastructure is vital to our country?
I was giving my colleagues, Eileen, you go ahead. I was giving you all a chance since I.
Well, the one thing I will say is that we at least expanded in broadband as infrastructure. We've got bipartisan support on that, and that we made some great gains on in discussions and movement on broadband. So I mean, I think that we have been able to make some progresses. It's the workforce as infrastructure in some ways, is trying to make sure, as always, I'm focused on getting enough people in our healthcare workforce, but we're also trying to work on making sure we retrain people into the new economy. That was one of the, and Joe can talk about that it was one of the big issues that the Republicans kept bringing up about how that they were the saviors of union jobs, which was an entertaining discussion for me to listen to. That that we were the ones that were going to destroy all these wonderful jobs for people. So I think that that's one of the things that we as Democrats have to also focus on, is making sure that as we're changing the economy, that we are focusing on making sure we're retraining workers and getting people into good paying union jobs that are a different infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's been really exciting to see as the infrastructure proposal from the president and from the Democrats in Congress has moved forward is how there's more. I think we're talking about infrastructure in a broader, more inclusive way than I'm used to hearing. It's so great to hear like the healthcare workforce or the childcare workforce talked about as infrastructure, right? Like, I think there's some nuance to that, right? Like, people aren't infrastructure, and like they're valuable in their own right, not just because of the services they provide, but also I think thinking about things in that more holistic way is really exciting. I think it's probably going to take some time for that to sink in for people to like think about, and for most voters who are less politically engaged to think about infrastructure in that more inclusive way. Within the sort of the definition of the traditional infrastructure, as we talk about transportation investments in the state, we are not talking about roads and bridges as the transportation solution anymore. I think that in the time I've been in the legislature, how much the conversation has shifted so that more legislators understand that even transportation infrastructure needs to also include walking and biking safely, needs to include transit choices, needs to include electrification of transportation, needs to include addressing the environmental impacts of our infrastructure, like removing fish passage barriers on our transportation roadways. So, when the time comes that the legislature passes our next transportation package, which I think will happen before too long, it's going to look nothing like the packages of the past, because we are finally seeing us electeds catch up to where I think the public has been for a while, and thinking that transportation is not just about single occupancy vehicles and making it easy for them to get where they need to go. While we still do need to do that, especially in West Seattle.
Just to add to that, 4 years ago, it was when I first came into Congress, the Progressive Caucus put forward a resolution that was authored by Ted Lieu, another great progressive, And it was a call for a $2 trillion infrastructure package, and infrastructure was defined as this much, much broader way. Now, the long-term care workforce wasn't in there, childcare wasn't in there, but it was defined as a much broader way of thinking about all the things that Joe was talking about, not just roads and bridges. Broadband was in there, schools was in there, you know, all of these different pieces that we think of as being the centers of grounding communities in being able to play, live, work, and go to school. And so I think that piece at the time, everyone said, that's crazy. $2 trillion, that's way too much. You all have heard me say that my definition of a progressive is just that we're first to the best and most just idea, and then everyone else has to catch up with us. And I'm really proud of the Progressive Caucus for pushing a much broader definition. And Pete DeFazio, by the way, the chairman of the T&I committee, was one of the co-founders of the Progressive Caucus 20 years ago in Congress. So he's very much in this notion of not just roads and bridges, but also what is all the policy that we need to really make this green, clean infrastructure, right? The power grid, all the different ways in which we have to address those things. The other piece of the long-term care workforce, and not thinking about people as infrastructure, as Joe said, but more thinking about what do we as human beings need if we are going to go to work. So if we think about being both economically productive and happy, spiritually fulfilled in our lives, then we need to have, just like we need a road to drive on to go to work, we need to have childcare if we're going to be able to actually take care of our responsibilities as parents and go to work. And so that is the shift that over the last 2 years we've really been pushing, that I think is one of the biggest framing shifts that we've moved to, along with, we haven't really talked about revenue. Joe Nguyen talked about, you know, all his great efforts and the legislature's great efforts on progressive revenue. But look, this is a game changer. We are talking about revenue raisers, not because we want to pay for things. As Ron Klain said to me, Pramila, it's not because we want to pay for things, it's because we want to make the tax system fair. That is a whole big shift as well. So there are these big perceptual shifts in how we think about government and how we think about supporting people to deal with the equity pieces that the president and Black Lives Matter movement and so many others have put up front and center.
So the next question, again, is addressed to Congresswoman Jayapal. Until single payer, Medicare for all, or single buyer, as I've been hearing that term in the news lately, Medicare for all is enacted at the federal level. What can you and your colleagues do to provide Medicare and Medicaid waivers for states who want to offer Medicare for all or something similar in their states?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So in the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force on Healthcare that I co-chaired last summer, we did get the Biden and then candidate Biden to agree to expand the waivers that are in the ACA to allow states to do exactly that, pursue public options, pursue single payer options that are more in line with Medicare for all, because it isn't enough. I mean, we need to allow the streams of revenue to be utilized for that. That has been the problem. I mean, a state can say, look, we want to do this. And we saw this in Vermont. It was a bit of a challenge when states say we want to do this, but if the federal government isn't providing the streams of revenue for use for the states, then we can't do it. So I had a bill that I introduced. It was Jim McDermott's bill originally. We made a lot of changes to it. That was exactly this. When I took on Medicare for All, I gave that bill to Ro Khanna. And so that bill has been introduced as well. And we are pushing to make sure that we expand those waivers. Look, we just haven't done enough on healthcare, in my opinion. It is there are a couple of things that I've challenged the Biden administration on publicly and privately, and this is one of them. I mean, we have not really moved forward on healthcare, broadly speaking. We've dealt with it in a large part around COVID, but there's a lot that we need to do even within COVID structurally to the healthcare system, and that's one of those things. So we're working on that. I I think, we're going to need to pass a real healthcare reforms bill that includes some of these things.
Next question is for our state legislators. Many bills came on in this session for police reform through the legislature. Do you feel after all of those bills as though we've done enough at the legislative level on this issue? If you feel that we have need to do more, what specific measures do you plan to carry forward and continue fighting?
Yeah, this is Joe. I'll jump in real quick as well. I don't think that we've necessarily done enough per se. I think that's a start. I think the biggest thing in general we need to address is the fact that we have to have trust between our communities and law enforcement. So in addition to the policies that we've put into place this session, I think where we need to focus more on is how do we build that trust and how do we get it so that way there's a mentality that law enforcement are guardians and not necessarily warriors within our communities. And certainly even work that I've done on arbitration per se, that was more in order for us to get data and access to transparency in terms of how things happen. So long story short, I don't think necessarily we've done enough, and the focus should be on how do we ensure that policing reflects the values of our communities here. And that's gonna be a much larger conversation as well.
Yeah, I echo and agree with what Joe said there, that this was a great session for police accountability. Like, we had some really important bills pass. Joe's bill to require that arbitrators have some training in bias and inequities to help ensure that they're better prepared for this work. But also the bill allowing decertification of police officers who demonstrate a pattern of use of excessive force, and the bills to reform police tactics and police use of force, for example, banning chokeholds and neck restraints. Those are great steps, but we're not done. And we're not going to be done until police officers and other law enforcement officers stop using excessive force and killing Black and Brown people unnecessarily in our state. And so until that happens, work is not done. Specific legislation, there's one big bill that didn't make it through the House that I think we need to come back and get done, and that was House Bill 1202 relating to immunity for at the federal level it's called qualified immunity. At the state level it's not precisely that term, but basically allowing people who've been harmed by police to hold the local governments accountable who are responsible for those police officers not using the right policing practices. And so while we got some other really transformative things done, and I really think we in some ways have maybe set a national standard for what those police reforms should look like, I think that the civil immunity for law enforcement officers and jurisdictions needs to be reformed. And I think that's probably the next big thing that I want to be sure we get done next year. But really a good book of work this year, including Joe's bill, which I think might have been the first one to make it to the governor's desk.
The only thing that I would add is that I thought it was a very positive thing that the communities worked with the police and that it really didn't turn. I mean, we had fights and that things were not necessarily all agreed upon by both sides, but I thought that the biggest progress that were how many bills that they actually worked out between the different communities and the different police at the Fraternal Order of Police and the WASPIC, that they didn't come totally unglued with what we were doing. So I thought that was a first step to get people working together and trusting each other rather than just be fighting about it.
The next question we have is for the panel. Are there specific issues that you feel are of specific priority regarding the residents of our district, and on which you feel that we need to make immediate progress? What are the underlying issues in these areas that you would like to address, and how would you like to go about resolving these issues as legislators?
I'll just chime in and just say the West Seattle Bridge and having a transportation package, and I'll defer to everybody else on time. But that's the biggest one I think for me is transportation is a big deal for the 34th, from ferries to Sound Transit, to the West Seattle Bridge. I know that there are still continuing conversations in that space.
Yeah, no, I agree. We hear probably more about between the ferry system and the West Seattle Bridge is what we hear the most from our districts. I would say, you know, the district's homelessness and what we're going to do about that is the other big issue, because we're starting to see more and more of that, even, you know, here in West Seattle and White Center down, you know, that we definitely see more and more homelessness. So I think that responding to that, and the good news is, I will say, with it, because we got so much money from the federal government to help us out on that we were able to put a lot of money in the state budget to go towards homelessness, specifically trying to get some short-term fixes for mentally ill and with substance use disorder, like through the Blake bill that we had to have a response to the Supreme Court decision on drug usage. And so we were able to get quite a bit of money in, and I think that we are figuring that we have for short term, and I got to remember, I think it's 2,000 people, and long term that for at least 1,000 people for housing vouchers.
Let me say on the federal level, because both of those, the two things that I wrote down are housing and transportation as kind of two big priorities, the West Seattle Bridge being obviously a big part of my focus. One interesting thing is we are bringing back community funded projects, community directed projects, previously known as earmarks, never to use that word again. And so that is allowing us with an opportunity. It's been so great for me to just learn about all the projects that are happening in the district. And so we put forward 10 transportation priorities. These priorities, you know, the total amount per member is like 15 million. So it's not like we can fund the West Seattle Bridge with this, but we worked with the folks in SDOT around what kinds of projects, mitigation projects could be helpful that are smaller community-based mitigation projects around road crossings and things like that as the bridge is getting built. I am talking to Secretary Buttigieg tomorrow, and the West Seattle Bridge is on my agenda to make sure that it is front and center of his agenda as we move forward with the transportation project. But then we also put forward a ferries electrification funding request as part of our 10. And these, if they're not already on our website and public, they will be this week, I think. All of these community funded projects that we asked for are public. So we got 10 on the infrastructure side, and then on the and there's also stuff around NOAA, for example, that we put in there. The Ballard Locks. There's a couple of really cool salmon recovery projects as well that we were able to put in a request for. We're not going to get them all funded, but you know, we'll try to get as many funded as possible. On the community-based projects, so this is everything that's not TNI. So these are all the other accounts. We also get to put forward 10 projects. And we really did focus on a number of housing projects there as well as, you know, tried to get some diversity across the board around education, youth education, other things. On housing, we put a lot of money into the rescue package, and I'm grateful that some of that is trickling down and is giving the state legislature, as Eileen said, more flexibility around how you use those dollars and apply them to the issues that we care about. In the next package, one of the top priorities, and maybe Rachel can put our 5 CPC priorities into the chat as well, is around housing. So we're asking for $70 billion just to deal with the housing backlog across the country. So that's just the backlog that we have. And I just spoke to Chairwoman Maxine Waters about it. That is her number as well. I've spoken to the speaker about it. What we have to do is, you know, we've got to invest again in building housing, affordable housing across the country, in dealing with homelessness. I have the Housing is a Human Right Act, which is specifically around homelessness, meeting with Secretary Marcia Fudge, my former LA for housing and homelessness, Ali Kugler got stolen by the Department of Housing. So that's a good thing for us because we've got her there now. But this is just a critical issue. And, you know, I watch Seattle, I think we all do. And we just have to address this housing crisis. We have got to address homelessness with a housing first model because nothing else is possible if you don't have a home. And we're seeing it actually right now with the checks. One of the issues that my office is dealing with is that a lot of houseless people are not getting their $1,400 checks because they're going to the homeless shelter and the shelter is getting multiple checks for people, but it's one address. And so those checks are being sent back. So we're really having a challenge with even getting any of these relief pieces to people who are houseless. So those are kind of two big priorities. Hopefully someone will ask about immigration, but that's another big one. Eileen kind of mentioned it, so I won't take up more time.
Great. I was just gonna jump in real quick. Representative Jayapal, I think you have a hard stop at the top of the hour. I wanted to give you a clean break if you want to say any last words before you leave us.
Well, thank you so much, Carla, and thank you to all of the board of the 34th and to my state legislators. It's just so amazing to see what you've been able to accomplish in this last session. I feel like, I don't know, when I was in the state Senate, it was so tough that 2 years. So I'm just thrilled to see what you're doing. We have a once in a generation opportunity right now. I really feel that way because of all the crises that we have had to deal with, because of all the tragedy, all the lives lost, all the jobs lost, all the ways in which the racial injustices have been put to the forefront. We have a once in a generation opportunity to do things that really shape the future in a way that I haven't felt for several decades. And we've got a president who, because of the progressive movement, because of states like Arizona and Georgia, where Black people, brown people, young people, indigenous folks, poor folks came out and voted, we were able to retake the Senate. We were able to win the White House. And so now he's thrown himself into this. And now we just have to really push to continue the work we're all doing to make the Senate pass these bills that the House is passing and to continue to build the momentum for the urgency. We can't wait. You know, people think we can do 2 bills instead of 1 bill. No way. I've seen how long it takes. We need 1 bill and we need it to get done before August, because once we get to the end of this year, nothing else is going to matter other than those midterm elections, and everything gets harder at the end of the year. So anything that people can do to just be engaged, you know, thank you for sending the letters. We are still the office that gets the most emails, phone calls, and letters of any district in the country. And yes, I am the member of Congress that got the most votes of any member of Congress anywhere in the country. So thank you for your trust, for your faith, but most importantly, for your engagement.
Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Jordan?
All right, so our next question is for Representative Fitzgibbon. You've championed environmental policy reform while you've been in the state legislature, and in recent years, we've taken some major steps forward. However, many of the people in our district and around the country still want something like a Green New Deal. How feasible do you think a comprehensive policy like this would be in Olympia? What components would you like to see included in a Green New Deal? And how would you like to see the federal government, specifically Congress, involved in expanding the Green New Deal nationally?
Well, I think that the bills that we've been passing sort of constitute a Green New Deal. You know, I don't think I differentiate between a cap and invest bill that's going to generate hundreds of millions of dollars, potentially over $1 billion every year in investments in a new economy, paid for by the largest polluters in our state. I think that is a Green New Deal. Yeah, I think a lot of times the discussion around a Green New Deal kind of starts and ends with this federal context where the federal government has the advantage that we don't have at the state is they can deficit spend. And so they can go in, they can issue debt and spend the money on transforming our economy. And I hope that they will. I think that's a big part of what we heard Representative Jayapal talk about here today, and what we're hearing President Biden and Vice President Harris talk about. You know, at the state level, we have to pay for the investments that we make. And that's what we're going to be doing by capping pollution and requiring all polluters to pay for the privilege of emitting greenhouse gases into our air, as well as transforming the transportation fuel sector, which in most of the communities in our state, including in the 34th district that are most polluted, they're polluted because of transportation emissions, whether that's from trucks or cars or ships or planes. You know, certainly in the southern end of the district, that's air, pollution from the airport. At the northern end of the district, that's often pollution from the seaport. And throughout the district, it's pollution from cars and trucks. So as we transition to cleaner transportation fuels, that's going to have a really positive impact on our local air quality. I see those as the kind of transitions that that really constitute the building blocks of a Green New Deal. The Green New Deal is an idea fundamentally about how do we transition our economy and create good jobs along the way. And the Cap and Invest bill that we passed, the Climate Commitment Act, requires strong labor standards for all of the investments that we make as a state. It allows tribal nations, as well as disproportionately impacted communities, as well as rural communities, to have specific set-asides of those dollars to ensure that we're not just seeing dollars flow into wealthier or more urban parts of the state. I think that the principles that I hear about in relation to a Green New Deal are the principles that we've embedded throughout our environmental policy making in the last few years, and I'm really proud of that.
The next question for anyone who has knowledge on this can weigh in. Are you aware of legislation in the works to ban juvenile detention in Washington? And if you are, if not, why not? And if so, when do you think that it will come up, and would you support such a policy?
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick as well. I don't know if there's legislation specifically to ban juvenile detention, but it has been towards banning the use of solitary confinement for youth. I think there's efforts around that. And candidly, one of the bills that we've been working on with Rep. Johnson over in the House as well has been ensuring that, say, for instance, youth who encounter law enforcement have access to attorneys, and making sure that we mitigate as much as possible interactions with youth and law enforcement, especially when it comes to cases where they might need an attorney. In fact, one of my first bills was, in fact, diversion to divert youth from the justice system away to more community-based focus. But I certainly would support banning the use of juvenile facilities in general, and we need to do better as a state in order to make sure that we support our youth so that way they don't get incarcerated in the first place.
I'll say we've taken some really important steps forward in reforming the juvenile justice system in the last few years. In 2020, we passed Senate Bill 5290, which eliminated the use of the court system to enforce non-criminal behavior. Specifically, this really relates to truancy. There was a multi-decade, I would say, failed experiment in incarcerating young people who skip school. That I think was well-intentioned and really also screwed up a lot of lives. And I'm glad we finally got that repealed in the 2020 session. We also passed legislation this year on to continue to reform the juvenile justice system by making it easier for the transition for people, for young people out of the juvenile justice system. That was House Bill 1186 by Representative Goodman, which basically says that when an individual when a young person who's served the majority of their term in the Department of Children, Youth, and Families custody, that they can serve out the remainder of their term outside of the juvenile justice system, out in the communities, to ease the transition back in. So there's a lot of evidence that shows that that sort of reform is the kind of thing that really helps young people who have a criminal history
transition safely back into the community. And so we're making, I mean, I think that, you know, banning juvenile detention categorically is a big step, and it's one that I'm certainly open to, but I think we need to figure out, well, what will we replace it with in order to ensure that there's still, you know, an ability to make sure that young people are, you know, have the supports that they need to be on the right track.
Our next question is regarding special education. Special education is basic education, and basic education is the constitutional right of every student in Washington. Yet, even outside the scope of the pandemic, our state doesn't fully fund programs and services for students with special needs. The cap limiting state SPED funding to 13.5% of a school district's student population is one of the more major issues in this area. What will you commit to doing in order to fully fund special education and the services necessary to serve the whole child when it comes to students with disabilities?
Well, I'll just start out a little bit. I think we recognized that the formula that got approved and actually got us out from under the lawsuit, we met the court's interpretation of fully funding. But I think that the legislature recognized that we needed more funding within special ed, and we've had more of a focus, I'd say, the last 2 sessions in trying to make sure that we get some money into it or more into it. So I mean, I think we are continuing to make progress in that direction. I mean, I will say education, of course, is not my focus, so I can't tell you what all they have worked on, but I do know that Representative Santos, who's the chair of the Education Committee, has been doing a lot of work in that. And then Pat Sullivan is our majority leader, and he's been a big education advocate for years. And so he's actually on our appropriations committee is probably, and Steve Berquist from the 11th they are the ones that focus on how we do our funding for education.
So our next question for the panel, what have you done and what are you doing to protect and expand access to sexual and reproductive health education and care? How do you intend to protect and expand these programs moving forward?
Oops, I'll start. I would say that Washington State is probably one of the leaders in that area, and that we certainly have made sure that we try and cover women's reproductive health and make sure that there's all sorts of, we did a big funding package for Planned Parenthood. Well, it's not just Planned Parenthood, but for they're probably the biggest beneficiaries out of it that went into this budget to make sure that access to reproductive care is available. And we also passed legislation to pregnancy, or the Protection Act. I'll get it said yet. I never can remember what we called it. That it's taken a couple of years, but I had we heard a lot about the Virginia Mason being taken over by the Franciscans and the concerns about the Catholic hospital systems that the majority of our hospitals in the state, which is very interesting for a state that is really not very, they're secular, to have as many hospital systems that are specifically Catholic. There's kind of a mismatch there that I've never been able to figure out. But it's the Protecting Pregnancy and Miscarriage Related Patient Care, to make sure that if someone presented in an emergency room and needed emergency care, that they would get the appropriate care. We had stories of different hospitals that where women had been in and really needed to either have an abortion because the pregnancy was failed, especially if it's a tubal, that type of thing. That women that had problems, and then when they don't take care of them, they can become septic. And there was a story from a woman up in Bellingham that had to, that was in a couple of times, and then they finally put her in an ambulance and sent her to another hospital. but she was very, had really not appropriate care. And so that was, we were able to get that bill finally passed this year. So I mean, I think that we have made progress, but I will say that it's probably the biggest concern is just the fact in our hospitals. But now more than the pregnancy, it's the death with dignity discussions that are not allowed, that I have concerns about, because most abortion care is not done in the hospital. So I think we are able to get around all of those issues with the hospitals. It's some of the not allowing the physicians to make referrals, that type of thing, that becomes a problem.
Our next question ties education into labor. According to the Washington Student Achievement Council, Washington ranks behind Oregon and California in promoting students from high school to higher education. One impact of this is companies either bringing folks in from out of state, outsourcing, or opening hubs elsewhere to tap into more technical labor. What can we do to break barriers preventing Washington students from receiving an education that will help them obtain higher income jobs?
Yeah, in fact, I'll hop in real quick. One of the bills that we passed this year was to allow for community and technical colleges to offer 4-year computer science degrees. So in Washington State, we've actually done a good job tripling the number of graduates in that field. However, there's still, despite that, a significant amount of people that we have to bring in, but also there's about 25,000 open jobs in that field as well. So in terms of making sure that we have access to educational opportunities, that means we need to make sure that we're also bolstering our community and technical colleges. So that was a pretty big bill this past year that we were able to pass, and it was bipartisan because I think everybody understands the value of education, supporting our community and technical colleges, and making sure that we have a workforce from people who are here as well, and then being able to support the economies that we're going to be addressing in the future as well.
Yeah, one additional piece of legislation I'd mentioned that we didn't quite get all the way to the governor's desk this year, passed out of the House, installed in the Senate Education Committee, was Representative Stonier's bill around pathways to graduation and just dealing with graduation requirements that were put into law, I think probably about 10 years ago, maybe a little less than 10 years ago, that have just turned out to be really unachievable for a lot of students, and that the original 24 credit graduation requirement was kind of intended to just funnel all kids, or all, I mean, not kids, graduates, high school graduates, into a college education. And that's just not what everybody needs. That's not everybody needs a college education in order to have a really fulfilling, successful career. And I think it's kind of an old paradigm that suggests that we should be trying to force, every high school graduate to go get a 4-year degree in college. And so I'm hopeful that we can get that done in the future, have an additional graduation pathway that allows students to complete a performance exhibition to show that they've met some criteria for their graduation requirements, rather than just requiring that everybody meet this kind of arbitrary 24 credit standard. One of the things we really have been trying to do more in our education policy making is to listen to parents and educators about what's actually going on in the classroom, and that I think has led to a greater understanding in the legislature of the places in which our existing bureaucracies and standards are falling short for kids.
Well, another question on the subject of intersectionality and education, and also back to healthcare. The COVID-19 pandemic has taken a tremendous toll on our public education system, especially our students. What will you do to support kids' physical, emotional, and mental health as they return to school in the fall? And what efforts are you fighting for to get every child back in the classroom in September?
Well, I'll just start out that we've had a big focus. Actually, that came through our Children and Family Services Committee more, but they really have been focusing on trying to get mental health counselors and nurses more into the schools. And so we did a big funding package, and I can't tell you how much it was because I don't remember, but I know that we did did get a large portion to try and help the schools get that, because there's big concerns because of COVID about mental health and making sure that there's somebody available for kids to talk to. So that has been a focus that they have definitely worked on. And then we did continue, something that you may not be aware of is that the state has been working on trying to get better access just for mental health for everyone, and specifically for the younger individuals. And we fund what's called the PALS line, which is a resource line for parents can call to get referrals to appropriate care for their kids. And we actually this was passed last year, so that in the future, the insurance carriers will actually kick in some of the money for those lines, because we have, we started them out as, the state funded it as experiments. And then we saw more and more people using the different lines to be able to use resources and actually get mental health help. There's different ones that they go through. And it showed that it was people with insurance. So we wanted to make sure that they were paying their fair share also. So we got that done. We have another psych line that any healthcare provider across the state can call. It's kind of like the mental line, and it's now at 24 hours a day. Someone can call like a primary care physician or somebody in an emergency room to get help from a psychiatrist on how to deal with problems. Because this is the interest, 90% of the psychiatrists in the state live in King County. So if you really need mental health help, it's got to come out of King County. So that was when we got that all figured out, we really worked on these lines. And the University of Washington is and Children's Hospital are the two places that are the home for the lines, and that's where they go through, the calls go through.
So I think we have time for one final question. I think we'll wrap up with asking you all, what are the best ways for folks to be proactive and get involved both in and out of the session?
Candidly, I'll just jump
Go
in.
ahead,
I know
Joe.
that the 34th does a really good job at being active and engaged. And I will say that your voices are very, very important in the process. What's interesting is during this legislative session, since we had access to remote testimony, we saw record numbers of people engaged in the process. I can't remember the exact numbers, but in general, there's something called testifying, signing in but not wishing to testify, where people would sign in and then just kind of make sure that their notes are being addressed but not necessarily speak. And generally speaking, you see maybe a couple of thousand per session. This one, you saw over 60,000 people signing in on bills, not necessarily testifying, but just showing that their opinions matter as well. And that, I would attribute, is one of the reasons why we had such a transformative year this past session, is because so many people were able to be engaged in their democracy. So I would suspect that that will likely stay going forward as well. Nothing official. I just think that that process works so well that we should keep it. So potentially that could be it, is testifying on bills that you're passionate about, making sure that you're engaged. The 34th in itself is great at engaging your legislators. So maybe even if you're working with partners and other LDs as well, would be a fantastic way of getting engaged.
Go ahead, Joe.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we know our constituents are not shy in the 34th, and that's a good thing. We know we always hear from you when you're happy with something we've done, or when you're not thrilled about something that we've done and we need to make a course correction. So thank you for that. I will say I wish that we were able to get back to everybody who wrote us. It's just like, given the, in the heat of the session, sometimes we're getting 200-300 emails a day, and we just can't quite get back to everybody at the pace that you deserve. In the House, we have one overstretched staffer each, right? And in the Senate, they have, Joe has a session aide and a legislative aide, and it's just not enough for us to get back to you all in time. But we do see everything that comes in, at least, right? And so thank you for that. I will say, if there's an issue that is motivating you, and you have the time and the bandwidth to get more involved, find the organization that's working in that space and get more involved in them. So, whether that's whether you're lucky enough to be a member of a labor union,
or whether you're looking for environmental advocacy or racial justice advocacy or police reform, or any of the things that we've talked about here today, there's an organization in that space doing that work. And they can do a really good job of sort of plugging, they're building a statewide network, right? And they're helping the members of that organization, or the people who are involved in that organization, focus their work on the legislators who most need to have their minds changed on that issue. And that's just often, I think that's one of the most impactful ways to stay both informed during the legislative session, as well as engaged kind of before and after the legislation, is like who's already there doing that work, so that we're not trying to reinvent the wheel or duplicate work that somebody else is doing already, but figure out how do I plug into some, to fill a gap in an existing organization. I think that's a really useful way to spend your energy.
And I just say, because as everybody said, is that you guys are all pretty well involved and engaged, or you wouldn't be here. That's one of the good things. But if you really want to get our attention on an issue, instead of when you belong to a group, there's the same email comes from everybody, so you know who it's from. Write a different email on a topic. And then because that's what I pay attention to, those to just see, okay, what do they have to say about it? That's not just the standard line. So that's the one just offside hint that I would give people.
So I think we are at the point where we're going to be heading into closing statements. So we have, we can go in order with Senator Wynn, Representative Cody, Representative Fitzgibbon, taking a couple of minutes to any final thoughts that are burning in your mind that you really want us to know about. Please share that with us in the final 2 minutes.
Yeah, no, perfect. Thank you so much again for hosting and having us on this beautiful day. And one of the things too is that these values that we have are based off of lived experiences from people in the district. And I think the legislation that we're able to pass in Olympia this past year is a testament to the voices being uplifted right now. So thank you so much for all the advocacy and the work that you're doing. And I will say that, we're very privileged to be here today on Zoom, being able to talk to one another. And there are definitely people there who are not necessarily able or have access to technology. So making sure that their voices are also being centered as well. But for me, it's just a tremendous honor to be able to serve. It's amazing what we can do when we have people in the legislature who are impacted by policy and then are able to now be at the table as well. Candidly, the Senate has always been more moderate, I think, in tone, and we've shifted that a little bit in the past few years. And because of that, that's why we were able to get some of these things done. So I am just personally honored to be here. I'm so thankful for the 34th and all that you're doing to move Washington forward. And I think really we can be a beacon for not just other LDs, but the entire state, because the values that we have here would do well for other jurisdictions as well.
All right, and I'll just give Joe a hard sign and say the Senate's still more moderate than the House. What are you talking about? Anyhow, but we had a good year. And I think we were all surprised. The thing that I would add is that because of Zoom, that there's many of us that have debated about whether the fact that the lobbyists couldn't catch us as easily was also one of the reasons that we were able to make so much progress. So it'd be great if we figured out a way how to keep it in some regards, the good things and the bad things of Zoom. I'll just phrase it that way. The one thing I just wanted to add, because I didn't really talk about it very much, is that because of the money, again, I'll say that we managed to get from the federal government, and that's hoping now with passing capital gains that will have a bridge and not see the big drop off. That was why we needed to get capital gains passed, because we of course won't see any money coming in from that for a couple of years. But we were able to make big investments in public health, which we have underfunded for years. And so I was very happy with that, and in substance use disorder. And I think that's something that our communities will see, and just a total change in how we're going to be dealing with the war on drugs, the failed war on drugs, and the changes that we made in that statute, and the fact that we're going to be going much more towards treatment. and trying to get everybody into treatment rather than punishment. So those are the two things that I would say I just wanted to point out of accomplishments that we were able to do this year that didn't, not necessarily got a lot of press, but things that was definitely positive.
Well, we've talked a lot about the great work that this legislative session delivered. I'll loop back to the electoral work and how the work that the 34th and Democratic activists throughout the state do in the election years. There's a direct through line from that work to these outcomes. It's because we have a strong majority in the House and a strong majority in the Senate that we're able to deliver. The number of these bills that we've talked about today that passed by one vote is a lot. And so like having Tawana Nobles defeat Steve O'Ban in the 28th district in West Pierce County, or having Alicia Rule defeat Luann Van Werven up in Whatcom County in the House, those elections have consequences, and the consequences manifest themselves when we get impactful laws related to education or healthcare or tax reform or climate change through. And so we need to keep doing that work because 2022, we don't know what the political environment's going to be in 2022. Historically, the president's party loses seats in the midterm election after he's elected. And we're going to have new maps. We're going to be going through the redistricting process this year. So we're hoping that we end up with, legislative districts that are a little bit more favorable to us than we've had for us as Democrats, not us, the three of us, but us as Democrats generally, than we've had over the last 10 years. But we don't know. We don't know what those maps are going to end up looking like. And we don't know what the political climate is going to be in November of 2022. So we have to be working kind of from now on forward, making sure that those swing district Democrats who took hard votes on things like capital gains tax have the support that they need from us, from our safer districts like the 34th, to communicate to the voters that they need to reach. And so I just would thank you for the work that you did in past years, because that has delivered the outcomes that we got this year and in other successful legislative sessions. And if we want to keep doing this in the years to come, we can't lose our majorities in 2022. So so thanks for all that you've done on that so far, and we'll keep bugging you about that.
Jordan, did you want to say a couple parting words about our policy caucuses before we wrap up?
Sure. Yeah, so thank you all again for being here and participating. I'm glad we could put this together. As I mentioned at the top of the event, some of our questions tonight came from some groups within our organization called Policy Caucuses. These are groups that we've organized to work on our behalf, and they are hyper-focused on different policy areas. The ones we have right now include arts and culture, education, environment, energy, and land use, government voting and elections, healthcare and human services, labor and commerce, law, justice, and civil rights, transportation and utilities, and tribal relations and sovereignty. So if you'd like to get involved, go ahead and shoot me an email at lac@34dems.org and let me know where and how you'd like to work with people like our amazing legislators and like Senator Wynn said, other LDs and organizations, so that we can make sure that we accomplish the goals that we actually have for the future.
Great. Well, again, thank you so much, Senator Wynn, Representatives Cody and Fitzgibbon. We really appreciate you spending some time with us on this gorgeous Sunday. Want to make a note that a few questions that we received in the pre-submitted form, we did not use those today. We are tabling those to our candidate forums later on this month. And I just want to put a plug in for the forums. Mark your calendars to join us as we learn more about all of our major races this year. Our Seattle City Council Forum will be held on Wednesday, May 22nd from 11 to 1, followed later in the day by the King County Executive Forum from 3 to 4. Then on Tuesday, May 25th, we'll hold a Burien City Council Forum from 7 to 9. Things are really up and moving in Burien. Lots of new candidates coming into play there, so it's going to be a very active race there. Finally, our candidates for mayor will be featured on June 5th from 11 to 1. And just a note that these forums are open to the public. do not require registration. And so the links can be found on our homepage, 34dems.org. All right. Well, thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Oh, hi, Joe's kid. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.